How about the tied for first place Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp? Always a pleasure to welcome in our friends from downtown, Matt Davis, Scott Kornberg, broadcasters for the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. Scott, you guys are tied for first place, winners of 3 in a row in the month of August, 8 of the last 10. Tell me about this hot streak for the Jumbo Shrimp.
Yeah, it's been awesome to watch because it kind of coincided with them losing a bunch of their best players. So you wouldn't think that they would be hot because they lost Lewin Diaz to a promotion end of July, J.J. Bleday to a promotion end of July, Charles LeBlanc, Max Meyer. So you lose so much, and you figure, okay, we'll see how they can weather the storm. And they've won 8 of their last 10 in response. So it's been really neat. They've got some players up from AA, some guys getting healthy, some guys have come down. So they've done a pretty amazing job considering that I think a lot of people saw them lose so much and they just keep winning.
Matt, from your perspective, how have you seen this team develop into a first place team right now?
From what I've seen, everybody kind of started off a little slow, but they're getting hot at the right time. I mean, we always talk about the hitters. I mean, they never really started off slow, but I've seen the pitching staff really come around. They had an average April. They maybe slumped in a little bit of May, some of June, but close to the end of June, heading into July and now August, the pitching staff has gotten a lot better. The bullpen is a little bit more dependable. They're starting to actually keep leads instead of having – I mean, there was a time where Scott and I would look at each other, a 2-run lead, 1-run lead heading to the 8th inning or 9th inning. We might start shaking our heads like, when is this going to kind of implode? And now it's the bats are kind of helping out the team. The 5-run leads, the 4-run leads, they're getting larger as the game goes on, and everybody's just getting hot at the right time, and it's great to see.
Scott, you mentioned a couple of standout names, guys that have gotten promoted to the major league level with the Marlins. J.J. Bleday, one of the most recent ones, hit 20 bombs here at AAA. Who are some guys that stand out to you from this whole entire year that have been standouts for this team?
Definitely him, and I think it's partly because he started off so rough, and he had a tough year last year in AA, and really struggled to begin the year. And we were up in Scranton, and he just didn't look good. He was making contact off the end of the bat like every time up, and all of a sudden we went to Norfolk, and it was just like something flipped. And really very few players work harder than him. Obviously he's incredibly talented to begin with, but pretty much from the beginning of May to this point, I mean, he's everything you could ask for in a player. And I know, when he got called up, Marlins fans can be hot and cold on him. And it's like, well, what more could you possibly want from a player? He hits for a ton of power. He walks, so he gets on base at an amazing clip. He can play all 3 outfield positions. He's a great leader in the clubhouse. I mean, he's everything you could possibly want. And maybe he's not a superstar, but you need really good players, right? Like every team, they can't all be Ronald Acuñas if you're a Braves fan, and obviously that's our local audience. So can't all be Ronald Acuñas. You have to have those role players and those solid starters. And I think, if that's all he ends up being, I think he can be more. It's a really, really, really good player. And I think for JJ, there was a long time where he thought, maybe he had to be something else. And I think he finally embraced who he is as a player these last few months. And it's a really, really good player. So he comes to mind as somebody who certainly stands out. Charles LeBlanc is a guy who, he was tearing the cover off the ball in the beginning of the year and never really cooled down all that much. If he had a short slump, he would just pick it right back up a few games later. He's versatile. He plays third mainly, but he plays second. He can play left field. He can play first base. And, people were clamoring for him to get called up. And finally he did. And Peyton Burdick is a guy in the outfield who, similar to Bleday, started really hot, then was kind of cold for a pretty extended time. And then recently in the last month and change, he's really picked it up, and it's been reported that he's getting called up to make his major league debut potentially this weekend. And so, another guy who's incredibly versatile, incredibly hard worker. So those guys probably come to mind offensively. Matt talked about how the pitching staff is gelled. It's been 48 games now. Their bullpen has a 2.5 ERA, and they've had to work about 4 innings on average in that span. So they've had to pick up quite a bit. And so you really can't talk about this team without mentioning like Andrew Nardi, late inning option, who's been fantastic since getting promoted. Will Stewart, his numbers aren't great on paper, but since moving to the bullpen, he's been fantastic. Jake Fishman made his major league debut last week, and he brought a new slider into this year, and his ERA is 1.87. So you really can't tell the story without those guys. And in a year in which they've started more than 20 different starting pitchers, they're one off the team record, and we're only in August. Those guys have picked up the slack, and that's a huge credit to them and their pitching coach, Jeremy Powell.
Matt, who are some guys from this current roster? We've talked about guys that have been called up to the Marlins, but on this current roster, who are some guys that have grabbed your attention?
You know, one guy that's grabbed my attention, and this is going to kind of be off the cusp, but Scott and I talk about it a lot. He's 36 years old, Ryan LaVarnway, and I would give a lot of credit to the pitching staff. It's because of him. He is 36 years old. He's been in the show. He's a veteran of the wars, but he works so well with this pitching staff. And as soon as he started with this team, I mean, Jacksonville, the Miami traded for him in, I want to say, middle of June, Scott. He's just come in and hasn't missed a beat. And I think he's a really good mentor for a lot of the young guys, whether it's a pitcher or a hitter, because we'll see some of our pitchers maybe struggle a little bit. He'll come out and say 30, maybe like 10 words. It's 10 seconds. He's out. He's back behind the plate. But he just knows what to say to have these guys reset. But he's a guy that jumps off the plate for me because of just how well he's come in and so quickly just works so well with the guys. I think Urara Encarnacion is a big name. Obviously, he made that humongous debut with Miami, a grand slam, a outfield assist, a stolen base, the first recorded player since 1901 to do all of that in his major league debut. I mean, those two guys immediately jump off the plate to me. And I would also say, I mean, we just got him a couple days ago, Jordan Groshans from Toronto, first-round pick a couple years ago. Obviously, everybody loves Willians Astudillo. He's been up and down so much this season, but when he's playing, he does so well. He hits the ball. He fields the ball. I mean, as Scott said, I would argue that he's another guy that can kind of hop around to different positions, and he's also another great clubhouse guy.
Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp are 57-45, currently tied for first place in the International League East standings with Lehigh Valley, the Iron Pigs, the AAA affiliate of the Philadelphia Phillies. Scott, what's been maybe your favorite moment to this point in the season? I know Peyton hit that grand slam the other night. Tell me about maybe your favorite moment so far on the field.
Well, that's a good question. This has been a crazy summer. I gotta jog my memory a little bit because I have a new baby. So that for me is my favorite. But, I probably go all the way back to the beginning of the season. We were in Durham. So first road trip, and Max Meyer is starting. And, we had him at the end of last year. He's obviously incredibly talented, highly billed. And you're wondering, all right, like, what are we going to get from him? The Durham Bulls have been the Jumbo Shrimp's nemesis last year and have turned out to be their nemesis again this year. And he pitched 5 perfect innings, and they just couldn't touch him. And he only threw something like 45, 50 pitches. It was just absurd. And unfortunately, he got hurt going back out for the 6th inning, just some cramping. So he made his next start fine. But, that to me, it just showed you how dominant he could be. And, I think this is a really good team. It's so different than last year, right? Last year's team was really good, but they were constantly coming from behind, and they had these just crazy comebacks. This year's team doesn't really have that. Last year's team had more than like 20 come from behind wins. This year's team is well in the single digits and not really close to the double digits. And yet you probably 100% of the time would take this year's team over last year's team in terms of just ability. And so I think, some of those individual performances, and that one to me probably stands out, as well as this is a game, ironically, that they lost, but falling behind 8-0 to Norfolk and coming all the way back to tie the game in the 8th inning on an opposite field home run by Bryson Brigman. I think it just, even though they didn't get the win, it just showed you that this team is really good because they could have just laid over. They had come back from 4-run deficits each of the last 2 days, winning one of those games, and to do it for the third day in a row, even not getting the win, I think it showed you the resolve of that group, and I think that's pretty special.
What about you, Matt? Favorite moment so far this year?
This is kind of off the field, but we were in Charlotte several weeks ago. It was end of June, middle of June. It was when Uriar was making his major league debut, and they had it on in the clubhouse. Everybody was huddled around. I forgot whose cell phone or iPad watching it, and when he hit the grand slam, and it just shows you how close this team is and how much they support each other. If it's not them in the show, they're going to go wild when one of their teammates does. And when he hit that grand slam, the entire clubhouse went wild as if somebody, they had just won the Major League World Series. But they were just so happy for him. My other favorite moment is when Charles LeBlanc got the call up at the end of one of the games in Gwinnett, and everybody just kind of stood up, a round of applause for him. Just way to go, Chuck. So happy for you. And just to see how close these guys are off the field, that kind of warms your heart, and that makes you realize how can you not be romantic about baseball.
Yeah, I love that. A few more minutes here with Matt Davis, Scott Kornberg, broadcasters with the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, tied for first place in the East right now. A hot ball club, 3-0 in the month of August, and they're right now in the midst of a series against the Memphis Redbirds, the AAA affiliate of the St. Louis Cardinals here in Jacksonville. And, Scott, you mentioned Max Meyer a few moments ago. He was called up recently to the major league level, and then a handful of starts ago, he went out with an injury. It looks like now Tommy John. Just a tough story to see for Max.
No doubt. That really just stinks all the way around. And, we were talking before we started recording, and the guy just works so hard. And he's a really smart guy, and in interviews he's guarded, but you see like the glimpses of what's going on in his head. And there are things you'll ask him, and you expect like the kind of cliche answer. Like, hey, Max, like, you're in AAA now. You're coming off 5 no-hit innings. Are you thinking about the major leagues? And the standard answer to that is, no, I'm just doing my thing. And he says, yeah, like I am. I was thinking about it. I've worked harder than I ever have in my life because I know I'm so close. And then when Ronald Acuna was rehabbing with Gwinnett, and he struck him out twice in one game, and you ask him about that, and he would say, the standard player would say, yeah, I don't really think about it. It's just another guy. And he was like, heck yeah, I thought about Ronald Acuna. Like, he's just, he's such a competitor. And to see somebody like that make his major league debut, and it was okay. There were some really good moments. The line is hurt by some inherited runners scoring. And it just stinks because you get to know him and you see how much this meant to him. You see how hard he worked, what it meant to his teammates, to his coaches. And for that to be in his second start, I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. And that just really stinks. And so we have to wait. He's going to work really hard on his rehab. But almost certainly, like that's probably the low light of the season because of just what he means to this group of guys. Obviously, what he means to a rebuilding team in the Marlins. And it's just been a tough year for them. A lot of their offseason acquisitions have not panned out, and I think they thought they could maybe compete for a wild card, and calling up a Max Meyer is like sort of insurance to get to that in the second half of the year, and instead they kind of called him up out of necessity, and really you get a tough moment like that. So it stinks. There's no other way to describe it.
Matt, you were telling a story about how Max has to calm himself down before starts. Expound on that story.
So it was kind of funny. The first time I ever saw him pitch was this year. And I went down for a pregame chat, just kind of talking to some of the guys around BP. I think Scott was there too. And we kind of chuckled because when he's on the mound, you could just tell he's on a mission. And Scott has said this. He's not on a mission to just beat you. He wants to destroy you. He walks so seriously on the mound. He doesn't kind of relax. He's very tense. You can kind of tell that it's like a heavy burden on him, that he wants to win. He wants to destroy you. And we were talking to him, and I just kind of brought up, I said, on the mound, some guys are loose, they walk around, but you just seem so tight and so serious. I don't think I ever really saw you smile. He's like, yeah, no, like sometimes guys have to come out there to kind of calm me down because he works so quickly. He works faster than that 19-second pitch clock. I mean, he's pitching with maybe 10 seconds still on the clock, and he's just ready to go. It's boom into the mitt, gets the ball back on the mound, and boom. Like it's maybe, Scott, 5-7 seconds that.
Yeah, he knows what he wants to do.
Right. And he actually, there's been several times that Jeremy Powell or one of the catchers have to go out there and say, slow down. Like, it's okay. This game's going to take 2 hours at least, no matter how fast you go. And that's what he kind of said, that sometimes he has to have somebody come out there and slow him down and calm him down because he just gets so amped up before a start, and he's just on a mission to destroy you.
You know, Matt, you mentioned something that I'm glad you mentioned, and I'll get your perspective on it, Scott. The pitch clock in AAA. How have you guys received it? How do you think it's doing? Do you think it's good or bad? What do you think about the pitch clock, Scott?
I love it. I think it's amazing, and I think it's going to get installed in the majors next year or soon after. There was a lot of moments watching baseball where you're just like, why is this taking so long? And this has cut out so much dead time to the point where like a 2-hour and 50-minute game, let alone a 3-hour plus game, is rare. And from a fan's perspective, that's amazing. Like there is so much dead time. You're trying to appeal to different audiences, and you're competing with, I mean, let's be realistic, other sports, right? Like people want to watch football, or they want to watch basketball, and these do bleed into the baseball season. And so, people see a football game and there's a lot of action, and they see or kind of sneakily a little action, but it feels like a lot of action. Basketball is constant action. And then baseball, I mean, just visually, Pedro Baez is a perfect example, the former Dodgers pitcher who ironically came to AAA this year, and his first pitch, he got a pitch clock violation. But they're just like, I say, what are you doing? Like, why are you? We were in Charlotte last year, and one of their relievers was just like staring at the, at the scenery, and it's a beautiful ballpark, and the skyline is really great, but it shouldn't take a minute in between pitches, and it's cut out so much dead time. It's been really popular with fans. It's been really popular with players. They don't want to be here forever. They want to, go home and see their families and their significant others and everything else. And, there are some people who are going to gripe that it should be a few seconds longer, but I think overall it's been a humongous hit across the minor leagues. And I think it's only a matter of time before it moves up because of that.
Matt, what do you think about the pitch clock?
I didn't know what to think about it until I got here. Last year I was in the Carolina League in low A, and they didn't have a pitch clock. So naturally, most of our games were still close to 3 hours. Ironically, the team I worked for were still the fastest in the Carolina League. But, I mean, I've liked it. There's a couple times where, I mean, I will agree that I'm one of those people that says it should be maybe like a few seconds longer. The one thing that I've realized as a broadcaster it's hard to do sometimes is to break away from the action and tell fun stories. And that's one reason I love working with Scott, is he's such a great storyteller. And that's one thing I want to work on. But when you have games that we call that are like an hour and 50, an hour 49, you don't have that time. It's just the game, which is okay. I mean, that's our job, is to report what the game is and bring the game to the fans. But, there's some times where you like to break away and tell some fun stories. And the most part, I do love the pitch clock. Getting home before midnight is a huge plus, and getting to spend some time outside of the ballpark is never a bad thing either.
See, I'm a big story guy myself. I love to tell the stories of the players and the coaches and stuff like that. So, Scott, if it's a pitch clock violation, it's an automatic ball on the pitcher? Is that how it works?
And there can be pitch clock violations on hitters. So if a guy takes too long to get into the box, you could have an automatic strike call. And more often it is on the pitcher, but we have seen it a handful of times called on the hitter this year.
So is it the same timing for the batter? Like they have the 19 seconds to get in the box, or how does that work?
Yeah, and there's certain things like, for pitchers, you can only make a pickoff attempt a couple times over to first base, and then on the third time you'd have to get the runner out. And we saw that one time this year in which a pitcher made 3 attempts to get somebody out and didn't get that guy out, and then he was just awarded second base. And so, I think if you do get there's that, like, well, if the pitcher didn't get the pitch off in the 19 seconds, and well, in theory, that would be on the pitcher, right? I think there's a little bit of judgment probably from the umpire, and the fact that, like, hey, this guy took forever to get into the box, and so I think there's a little bit of judgment there. But for the most part, it's been pretty seamless. I mean, the hitters know that they're not technically supposed to take their entire bodies out of the batter's box. Like, you would step out with one leg, and the pitchers know, like, okay, I got to get this off. And it probably was a big adjustment the second week of the year in Durham. I mean, there was every game there was a violation, sometimes several. And after that, I mean, I really can't think of, you get them every so often, but it's now come to the point where it's like once every few weeks. It used to be every day. Guys have adjusted. They realize it's not that bad. And now it's, kind of a rarity in the game.
And Matt, I've heard, and Scott as well, I've heard that 2023 is kind of the floating timeline of when they're trying to get this implemented into the major leagues. And Scott, I think that's probably the case. I mean, if something works at AAA and it's clear that it's working, it's going to get implemented sooner rather than later in the major leagues, right?
Absolutely. That's the goal, is that it's not that baseball is a broken product. It's an amazing product, but people in baseball hate change. And what I think people didn't realize for decades and decades and decades is that the game changes organically, whether you make rule changes like football, which obviously has a lot of different rule changes, every X amount of years, or whether you don't. And so the game changed incredibly, because it's not just the fact that guys were just kind of, as you even watch in a major league game, moping around and taking forever. It's the fact that there's so many more strikeouts and walks now. So and home runs. So there's so little action. So even these breaks feel so much more. And that's not because anything changed in baseball. It's just because players became stronger, and because teams started realizing, like, hey, we want guys who strike out more people, because if we have a pitcher who puts the ball in play more, there's a higher probability of being, a hit dropping in. Whereas there is literally a 0% probability of a hit with a strikeout. And, why would we want, someone not to hit a home run? Because the runs are on the board. There's no chance of someone making an incredible defensive play, or somebody getting thrown out on the bases and having to, with all these strikeout pitchers having to string together all these huge runs. Like, it makes more sense to hit more home runs. And so the game organically moved in that direction. And, it's not just here. There's probably way more drastic changes in the lower minors between how they regulate defensive shifts, and in the independent leagues with the distance of the mound to home plate. So this is pretty basic. I mean, the pitch clock and the bases are slightly bigger. Some of the stuff in the lower levels is significant. And, I think that they're going to make those judgments. But I just think it's smart. And I don't think people were worried if it's going to change the game from a viewing perspective in the minors. I really don't think it has, except for a positive way. And it's been received so well that, here, the pitch clock, you could see is something that's being really, really well done. Maybe other things like defensive shifts, though it seems like those are going to get put into play as well as regulating those. Like, there's probably more of a argument for one side or the other. But unfortunately, that's kind of the way the minors are looked at, is some experimenting. But I think it's worked out pretty darn well, at least in this regard.
Yeah, I saw a comment from Henry Davis, the top pick by the Pirates in 2021, the catcher, and he was asked about playing with the pitch clock, and he said it's like some of the most fun playing baseball he's had in a long time. So when players make comments like that, I think it definitely shows that it's something that's working. Matt, tell us about the series that you guys are in the midst of right now against Memphis. Jacksonville's won 3 in a row, and we'll get to the weekend in a second. But why has Jacksonville, in your mind, Matt, had success so far in this series?
Well, it's kind of funny. They play the Redbirds and the Gwinnett Stripers so differently than the other teams that they've played this year. I mean, with the win last night, I think Jacksonville against both the Stripers and the Redbirds are like 24-7 against both of those two teams. It's hard to explain because both of those teams have a little bit of talent. I think the Redbirds are a little bit more talented than the Stripers. The Stripers are kind of an older group of guys that are Braves minor leaguers. But, this really goes back to how Jacksonville plays on the road. They have one of the best road records in the league. They're on the road this season, 33-21. The first 12 games that they played them were at AutoZone Park in Memphis. And, even when J.J. Bleday was here mashing 20 home runs, I asked him, and he said, we love playing on the road. At home, it's a little bit tougher. I've seen this team is kind of living and dying by the home run. And now with new guys coming up, they have to kind of change their game plan. We have a lot of guys that are speedsters now. We don't have, losing Bleday, losing Charles, losing Lorenzo Quintana and Peyton Burdick. Those are 4 guys that had double-digit home runs, and I think we might have 1 or 0 guys with double-digit home runs now on the team. And so I think having the majority of games on the road to start the season up until this point is why this team has done so well, because they crush the ball on the road, because teams don't have 375 to right center, 420 to dead center, or 382 to left center. Everybody has, normal dimensions. I mean, this is kind of an outlier. This is the Tiger Stadium of the minor leagues, I would argue. And so playing the Redbirds at AutoZone Park, the ball flies out of that ballpark. It's just a hotbed for home runs, and Jacksonville just mashed home runs. They're hitting over 280 against the Redbirds, and the majority of that has been at the Redbirds home park. And I think that they've just been a juggernaut on the road, and I think that's really helped them.
As we wrap things up, Scott, tell us about what's coming up on the weekend homestand for Jacksonville.
Yeah, well, 3 more games against Memphis. Post-game fireworks tonight, which obviously is a huge hit here. There's going to be several rehabbers with the Jumbo Shrimp, so a chance to see several major league players. John Birdie, Brian Anderson, Cole Sulser. So kind of guys who are pretty established in the major leagues will be here through the weekend, which is pretty exciting. Obviously a giveaway tomorrow, which is a huge hit, those Saturday games, and Family Sunday. But I mean, this is a team that's playing really well. We're really fortunate. The community continues to support us so significantly, and that's incredible for us to continue to see between the fireworks shows, between the back-to-school lunch bag giveaway tomorrow, the Family Sunday, catch on the field and run the bases afterwards. I mean, we've had amazing crowds this year. Cannot say it enough, how grateful we are for Jacksonville and the support we continue to get year after year after year. So we have this series on the weekend, battle for first place potentially next week at Durham, and then back-to-back homestands. Nashville, which has the best record, comes in the following week, and then Norfolk, which has a ton of talent, comes in after that, and that'll be it for August. There's 18 home games in August. We're through 3 of them, and the Jumbo Shrimp are undefeated. So, so far, so good.
That's right. Last chance this weekend homestand, last chance to see the Jumbo Shrimp in town before the 16th. They're back home against Nashville. Matt Davis, Scott Kornberg, broadcasters for the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. They're red hot, 3-0 in the month of August, as they've mentioned. Guys, I could do this all day with you. Appreciate a few minutes of your time today, and best of luck this weekend.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure.